All right, welcome to another incredible story. Man, Oleg and I, we were just on for like 10 minutes in the green room, and I was like, okay, pause, pause, pause. We have got to get this in the recording because the conversation went deep quick, which I am excited about. It always does when we resonate and we start talking about stories. And we start talking about the impact and how this transforms so many people's lives, not only our own, but everybody else that's listening, and how these stories have affected our growth, our potential, the way that we see life, the perspectives, and I could go on and on and on, but I wanted to get into this so that way we could get it recorded. But I do want to do this, Oleg. So again, first of all, thank you for taking the time out of your day.
Mhm.
Greatly appreciate that. But secondly, we always start with this question is who is Oleg? I don't want to know what you do, but I want to know who is Oleg.
That is a $1,000,000 question that I've been trying to answer for 32 years of my life. So thanks for starting with that one. I would say for me, what I've discovered about who I am is I'm someone who's genuinely curious about life. I'm curious about people. I have come to a number of different realizations throughout my own journey where I ultimately believe that life is about people and experiences. That's just what my journey has taught me. And once I had that realization, I started to focus everything on those two things. So, how can I show up for myself? How can I show up for the people in my life? How can I cultivate a lot of these relationships that are meaningful to me? And then places. How can I go and visit more of these places? How can I create more of these memories? I'm a traveler at heart. When COVID hit, I did maybe something that many people would shy away from. I packed my backpack. I drove from Austin, Texas to Ann Arbor, Michigan, dropped off my dog with my parents willing who willingly took him in for a year, and I went and solo traveled across 24 countries. I lived in Europe, Africa, South America. I shattered many of my beliefs and myths about those places, thinking that they're all dangerous and shouldn't be visited. And don't get me wrong, there are places that are dangerous, but there are also places that are dangerous in Philadelphia. And while I'm looking outside the window right now,
Absolutely.
so that's who I am is someone who's curious, someone who's passionate about life, someone who likes to connect with different people because I believe that we are that much stronger when we are connected together. Uh, I don't think I'm ever going through life on my own. I think that someone else that I know of for a fact is going through similar or the
Yeah.
same exact thing that I am. And so when I've come to understand that, I started to realize that, okay, it's in my best interest to continue connecting with other people because when I do so, the challenges no longer seem that challenging, right? In fact, oftentimes they look like opportunities to engage with. And that's what I started to come to understand. And people like Ashley that you've connected with and had on your show as well. She's been a huge advocate of this too, and just helping me realize that, hey, we're so much stronger as a community. We're so much stronger as a group than we are individually and trying to become our own islands, which I have a tendency to do so from time to time. But
we,
hey, who doesn't, right?
yeah, we all tend to put up those walls. We all try
There
to
you go.
sometimes break it because we're just afraid at times. So I have to actually ask this question,
Yeah.
Michigan, right? So
Huh?
did you at the very least, did you get up into the Pictured Rocks area in your travels, or did you skip that Upper Peninsula?
So it's funny that you ask another great question because I have been talking to my partner and I we've been discussing different areas to visit in Michigan. Picture Rocks is one of them. The farthest north that I've gone was I used to go to a camp with my parents called Camp Michigania, which I have no clue where it's located, but I know it's 3-4 hour drive from Ann Arbor, and I know it was up north. But no, I don't think I got as far
So
as there,
that's
because
the
'Cause I've seen
amazing thing.
pictures of it, and that's like a really fascinating,
Yeah, I
movie
actually because I love
picturesque type
traveling as well.
place.
So if I can put a little
Yeah,
uh, bone in it. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's
sure.
just the little pin of the Pictured Rocks, especially if you like hiking or whatever. I would say it is easily in the top 5 locations in the United States. The only other one that I've liked better is
Mm,
Zion National Park in Utah. Other than that,
okay.
all of them are. I mean, Colorado with the Pikes Peak and all that, that's cool, but man, I'm telling you, if you're missing out if you have not seen or walked or hiked in the UP along Pictured Rocks. It's just it's
Really?
that incredible. So that's a whole
Okay.
thing. We can
What about Grand Canyon? Have you been there?
I have.
You would
It's
list that as your top 2 or
not
3?
top 5, not top 5.
Really?
Yeah,
It's
I don't know.
fascinating.
It's not top 5. But that's just me. I mean, like, everybody likes things
Sure.
differently, so
Yeah.
but yeah, it's pretty amazing. So all right, let's go into what we're supposed to talk about because I could talk about travel all day, and I think we've got a lot of common interests there. But I know that we're going to lead into why stories are so important, and that's going to be part of this conversation. And we're going to also talk about how the impact of stories can change our lives and change our perspectives. But let's start with what you thought life was going to be like when you stepped into, or were about ready to step into, let's call it adulthood, or call it your business life or your career path. How did you think it was going to go? What were some of the things that you were, I would say, expecting, but anticipating? Like, where was your mindset at that point?
Well, first of all, I did not believe that entrepreneurship was even a possible path you can
Well,
take
that's a
within your
big
life
one.
path. And part of it has to do with the fact that when I was younger, so my story is that I was born in Russia, and then when I was adopted when I was 12 years old. So when I came to the States, I came in the middle of 6th grade, which was maybe slightly older than when you were asked that question at school. You know, you have career day, you bring in parents, and then kids are asked the question of what do you want to be grow when you grow up? And sometimes you hear answers that are totally maybe absurd, maybe not, right? Like, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be this, but they're all professions that are possible because other people are doing it. So I missed that phase of my life when I went into the traditional educational school system, and instead, I was being asked the question of where do you want to go? Where do you want to go to college? What type of job do you want to have from there? So slightly same question, slightly different with a different
No,
pressure.
can I pause you on that one? Because this
Please.
is really important. I think there is an underlining assumption that that's what you're going to do. It's not a, are you going
Correct.
to go to college or are you going to go into a different field? It's the underlying assumption that this is the narrative that you're going to play out. You're going to go to school. You're going to get a degree. You're going to get a job.
Correct.
And they're assuming that that is, and that I've seen that often in our society where it's an assumed this is the path that you're going to take.
Correct. Correct. And I think the danger, it's a double sided thing with that. I think the danger of the path is you are obviously limited to that way of thinking that, okay, these are my only options. I know plenty of friends who dropped out of college, who dropped out of high school, who no longer work traditional jobs. I have a recent friend of mine who chose a completely different path. He's going into ministry. I didn't even think that was an option, but at the same time, he's sharing with me all these different things that he's had to do, such as literally sit down in front of somebody like you and ask you for money to support his life. I think that's a very challenging thing to do in this world. So there are all these career options that automatically get eliminated once you are ingrained with that particular path. And then the other side of that is what I've had to learn is when you are put on that path, it makes life seem as if there is a blueprint.
Mhm.
I go to this school, I go to this college, I get this degree, I get this job, I get this pay, I get this house, I get this dog, blah, blah, blah. Not always the case, right? Now, some of those things you might be able to hit, absolutely. There are certain companies who hire based on the school you went to. I'm sure it's still true. There are certain companies that will give you X number of salary that you wish for. So I think there is kind of a blessing and a curse with both. The curse is that obviously you're limited by that story that you're told that, hey, if you do these things, you are going to get here, and it eliminates all of the other possibilities. So for me, entrepreneurship was one of those things. And I stumbled upon entrepreneurship when I was in college. I was majoring in Russian translation. Out of all the majors in the world, I picked very specific one. And I remember it was my sophomore year. I was stumbling through one of the halls and I came across this lab called the entrepreneurship lab. And I walked in, had no clue what it was all about, just going from one classroom to another. And I came across a professor who has become a mentor and a great friend of mine. Her name is Mary Heidler. And she said, "Can I help you?" And I just responded with, "You might be able to, because don't know where I'm at. I don't know what this is about." And so she's like, "Hey, this is what we do. These are the type of classes we offer. Have you ever considered adding this on as a potential minor to your degree?" And mind you this, as someone who is in the translation program, very, very few people explored anything remotely close to entrepreneurship, business, marketing, sales, anything like that. Because so much of that industry is dependent on you go to school, you receive the education, and then oftentimes you end up in the form of government or you work for translation agencies. So there you'll be doing specific translations when it comes to medical documents, business documents. So there weren't really starting a business or anything like that. That wasn't really a thing that was ever discussed in any of my classes. So when I stumbled upon this, my world blew up. Then I started to realize that, oh, you can actually become that. And then to backtrack even more, uh, my parents worked traditional jobs. My dad has done, maybe he still does to some degree, formal consulting, but I still think that's drastically different than starting your own business, right? Than experiencing the feast and famine type months and years, which happens to, I think, every entrepreneur. So I didn't even think that was possible. And then I kind of started to dabble with one venture led to another. And here I am, however many years later, able to do that. It hasn't been the easiest of journeys, but at the same time, who's to say that a regular job is an easy journey, right?
I was just gonna say, choose the hard,
You know,
man.
you
Yeah.
choose your hard in life, and I'm choosing this one. And at this point, to be completely honest with you, unless there is an opportunity that comes that can, and it would have to be a hell of an opportunity at this point to take me away from the entrepreneurial path, I don't think I can ever do a job because there's something about this particular path, the sense of freedom. Now, there's also a greater sense of responsibility, right? No one wakes you up, at least no one does it for me, saying, hey, you got to do these things. You better finish them because if you don't, then you don't have clients, you don't work, you don't have money. And then that starts to influence your rent, your roof over your head, food on the table, all these things. So I understand that part, but at the same time, I don't think there's another path in professional world that can offer that.
And I love what you said there earlier because you said it basically it gives you that mistaken. Well, you didn't use the word mistaken, but you use the word blueprint.
Yeah.
That you get this feeling that if you follow this blueprint, your life is going to turn out just fine. And we were talking in the green room a little bit about the interesting aspect of stories is that each story has its high and its low, and it has the good with the bad, and you have some really, really dark times where you don't think you're going to make it out of that, right? So the blueprint, correct me if I'm wrong here, and this is the way my
Mhm.
brain works sometimes, but it basically creates this blueprint of a flat line. Like you do one, two, three, four, and everything's going to turn out just fine. But what happens when it doesn't? What happens
Mhm.
when, yeah, like you mentioned, yes, there are a percentage, and it's probably a small percentage of businesses that hire because of where you went to school and because of the path that you were taking. But that's a small percentage. I would say it's not greater than 50%. So, what about the other 60, 70, 80% of the individuals that have been following that blueprint, thinking that it was going to be a straight line, all of a sudden getting knocked over by, and some people call it the waves of life, the shaking of life, the whatever of life, and now they realize that they're in the lows and the highs. What do we talk about that? How do we, and maybe this is, and I'm really curious,
Yeah.
your own spot is like, what was that like when that blueprint kind of got shook a little bit there in college? And you're like, oh my goodness, there's another opportunity, there's another path, there's another way to go. How did your mind actually comprehend and digest that to be able to say, okay, yeah, I can move that way?
Well, I think the first thing that it did for me is that it gave me excitement.
Mm.
It was something that was new to me, and it was so foreign. Where, and I'm also the type of person, and I have been for as long as I can recall. Whenever I see or experience a new subject, I'm genuinely fascinated by it. I want to explore it. I want to feel it. I want to see what it's like to be in that, and that's regardless of the area of life. So when I discovered that, that was the first thing I realized is I was excited. I was excited to try it. I was excited by the possibilities that type of life can create. Simultaneously, one of the other goals or objectives I had for myself was I wanted to figure out a life from a laptop. I saw too many people in my own life, too many people outside of it, who were going into physical buildings and not liking their jobs, but at
Hmm.
the same time, not having the freedom to switch as quickly as they wanted to because they felt that they were stuck to this office, and some for good reasons because they had families to support, this, that, and the other. And I just started to realize and look at them as examples of the type of life I wanted to create. And that wasn't it. I wanted to figure out how can I create a life from a laptop regardless of where I am in the world, so I can connect and do the same things that other people are doing, right? Pay your bills, live your life. So excitement was the first thing. I think another thing that happened to me is there's a level of confidence that you get about life that wasn't there before. Now, when you mentioned the blueprint aspect, I think what happens is when you have a blueprint and let's say some aspect of it does not work out, the confidence decreases, right? Anxiety increases, depression increases, uncertainty increases. And it can put you in a very interesting position where now you have to learn these things, or it puts you in a shell because the pressure is so high with all those things. So that's what I had to learn throughout just this entrepreneurial journey is all of these concepts are present every day. I don't have to wait until tomorrow to experience what it's like to be anxious, right?
Yeah.
Or what it's like to be stressed. I'm engaging in that every single day, which ultimately I think leads to higher resilience, more confidence in myself and my abilities, and then also just a kind of a focused, desire based mindset where I start to look at life through the lens of, okay, if this is the path that I'm choosing, therefore it's in my best interest to learn all of these skills that I need to do in order to be able to succeed in this space. One of the other things that I'm extremely grateful for as part of this path, compared to maybe some of the other paths that people explore, is having seen people who pursued the quote unquote traditional path. And this is not a knock by any means by anyone who's ever done that. But I think at a certain point, some people stop learning. They stop
That's true.
engaging with that thing because then it becomes flatlined. Like you mentioned, right? I know the job. I know what I have to do tomorrow. I know what I have to do next week. I know what quotas I have to meet. There's a very standardized process. Entrepreneurship, I can't tell you what there is standard about it. Tomorrow is going to be a completely different day than what it is today and that week after. And so I think one of the other things that I've learned through this entrepreneurial journey is the importance of learning. You have to learn in order to succeed. You have to stay curious. You have to stay open minded. Uh, there is no blueprint, there is no roadmap. And even if someone else has done the business that I'm doing, my journey is still going to be different.
Yeah, absolutely. But I love what you're saying, but I find curiosity, like what you said earlier, in the diversity that we see in people
Hmm.
and how some of us are wired to be entrepreneurs, to take that creativity and try to figure out something. But if we didn't have accountants and if we didn't have clerks and we didn't have all of the details of things that have to get done, because those people, they love that consistency. They love doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. For me, it would drive me nuts. I'd be like, I can't do this. I just couldn't. And but I would
It
be like,
already
this is,
does.
yeah, I would be like, this is the definition of insanity for me. I mean, like, I can't do it.
Yeah.
But I know individuals who love the accounting, the bookkeeping, the daily facts and figures and mathematicians and scientists and people that have to. I have a really good friend that works at Johnson and Johnson, and that's what he does. Is he's very and I. So my point is like even if we have the experience and the challenges of breaking out of the blueprint, I think that there are definitely some aspects that we will at times feel that anxiety. It just shows up differently. Like you said, we as entrepreneurs, we embrace it on a daily basis and you get more resilience. But at the same time, there's others that do touch that. So let's go on, maybe kind of go into this part of it, because you mentioned along your journey, you found the power and the impact of stories. Why are stories so important to you? I know you've spoken on this. I know you've kind of intertwined this with a lot of what you do, but why are stories so important for you and for your life and for how you connect with others?
Part of the reason is because I think so much of meaning is based on the stories. I've had a realization, I don't remember when, but it's probably been many, many years ago by now, where I started to understand that so much of life is based on the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves and about the things that are surrounding us. I want to say it was Think and Grow Rich that was the first book or one of the first books that influenced that. And ultimately, what that book helped me understand is that you can actually think and grow rich from your thoughts alone. You didn't need to have all these other things. So once I understood that, I started to realize that, okay, if I can grow rich from my thoughts alone, therefore, it's probably in my best interest to try and understand what are the thoughts that I'm experiencing and how are those thoughts becoming a reality in front of my own eyes. And that's where I think the story and the narrative plays a really big role because, and this is a perfect example, right? I could have gone into this interview with a set of stories saying, hey, this is going to be boring. This is not going to excite me, blah, 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 right? Instead, I chose to go into it through a completely different perspective. And that's, I'm curious to connect with you. I'm curious to learn about you. And I hope the same is going to be done vice versa. And then for anyone else that's going to be listening, I'm also going to be curious, what are they going to get out of it? Right. And how might I be able to engage with them? Not even necessarily to help them or solve whatever difficult situations they might be going through in life, but how can we relate? How can we relate on a point where whatever you're going through will not make you feel like you are the only one going through that? And so that's where I think stories play a really big role because I get a choice in the type of narrative that I have. I get a choice in the narrative that I have right now when I'm listening to other people, when I'm listening to myself, whatever it is that I'm saying. And the other thing that I started to realize about stories is because they play such a big role. I mean, if you think about the stories and all the different things they influence behaviors, emotions, our perception, our view of the world, the meaning that we create around us, all of these different sectors, then I started to get curious about okay, if that's true, if stories are that influential within all of these different areas of life, then the question for me became was what are the stories that are holding me back? What are the stories that are not beneficial to me? Now, I haven't met one person yet who enjoys living in negative stories, who just enjoys negativity. Are there people like that? I'm sure there are. I haven't genuinely met one that says, hey, I wake up thinking and dreaming about this. It might be possible. I'm the type of person that genuinely believes that, okay, even if I do experience negative moments, I want to get to the positive end, right? Like I want to experience some optimism, some hope, some uplifting thing throughout the day. And that's where I think a question like that can play a really big role. And that's what are the stories that are negatively impacting you? What's not serving you? What's holding you back? Give me a chance to bring awareness to those things. And then from there, through a variety of different tools and methods and books and podcasts, I can start reframing those things into stories that can help me move forward, that can help me feel better, that can help me feel more empowered throughout my day. Um, but those, I would say, those are the biggest moments that I've had within my life. Was Think and Grow Rich being the first one. The Alchemist was another great book that I read, which is also a great story to begin with. But that also taught me the importance of my self-talk, my inner narrative, and then from there, it's probably just been thousands of other people. Mel Robbins speaks about this where she talks about kind of, understanding what it is that you're telling yourself internally, how that's manifesting in front of you. And one last thing that I'll share with you on this topic is once I became aware and once I started to develop this awareness within my own life, it becomes impossible to ignore because you see the circumstances, you're living them out, and those things become impossible to ignore because they're literally happening right in front of you. And so as they're happening in front of you, I think it's only natural to start thinking, well, what can I do differently to change whatever it is I'm going through? Right. And that's where I kind of started to turn inward and think to myself, okay, I could see the pattern. I could see the pattern of how some of these things are shaping up. Therefore, let me see if I can interrupt it early. and change something within that process that can hopefully change the outcome and the final result.
Yeah. There's a lot of depth in everything that you just mentioned. Let me pick out a couple of things here because I think this is really important. Most people, when they hear Think and Grow Rich, the first
Mhm.
response that they look at is like, dude, you can't think yourself into monetary richness. So if we go back and can you define richness? Because I know we talked briefly about this, but can you define what richness is to you? And then that way, that sets the framework or the foundation for everything that you just talked about in regards to the stories.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think you hit the nail on the head. Even when I read that book, one of the first things that shattered in my own uh, can of myths was thinking that monetary was the highest level of richness. And it's not. I think the highest level of richness for me is clarity of thought. I think the highest level of richness for me is a sense of agency, thinking that I actually have some control over the choices that I'm making. I think a highest sense of richness for me is literally understanding that there's a choice. I have a friend of mine who's pretty much instilled this within me to this point. She said, "Don't ever give away your power." That's richness to me. In knowing that regardless of the set of circumstances, I have power in the choices that I'm making and how I'm interacting, when I'm reacting, when I'm responding. That's all internally. No one's paying me money to do that. And I don't even think anyone can put a price tag on any of those skills. So that's what I realized when I read that book ultimately is that it's so much more than a monetary thing. And really if you think about it even deeper than that, think of the quote unquote richest person on this planet, someone who has the most money. And then you read the same story or similar set of articles a year from now, that person will most likely not be that individual that you remember. 10 years from now, it will be a different individual. So it just shows that even that scale changes. So theoretically, like you might be that person for a day, for an hour, but there's always going to be a next one. So that part also never really resonated with me. And to some degree, I think, and I used to think that way too. Don't get me wrong. I used to
Right.
think that that was the thing you strive for in life.
Well,
As much
it's
money as you
interesting
can
because you brought up
accumulate.
Napoleon Hill, which is I think that book is phenomenal. However,
Mhm.
he wrote another book, and I believe it was called Outwitting the Devil. And if you haven't read that,
I read that
that's
one
a
too.
that's a mind-blowing. So the reason why I'm bringing that up is because when you couple together the Think and Grow Rich book along with Outwitting the Devil, because there's a lot of concepts in there that he talks about as far as how we get stuck in patterns and trapped into our own way of doing things, and sometimes it's just a laziness. Sometimes there's all kinds of things that trap us into the position of where we're at. And so again, combining those two books together, you can start to see how I love the way you defined richness. And for me, defining richness really has so many different facets, everything from finding fulfillment to finding purpose to being able to have that confidence of who and how you were created and showing up in the world authentically in that way. That's richness. That's what he's really, when you boil it down, that's really what he's getting at. So I'm glad we talked about that because I think that's something that so
Quality
many people.
relationships, I think that's something that gets swept under the rug. I mean, I don't know if it's true within your own life, it's certainly within mine. I try to share this with a lot of my friends, but I think a lot of people underestimate the power of relationships. And so therefore they don't invest in them. Or they'll invest in them when they're needed. They don't invest in them when they're not, quote unquote.
Well, the other trap is based on, again, some of this false narrative that we've lived
Uh-huh.
through is because we have to show up a certain way, and showing up that certain way, whatever you want to call it, whether it's putting on a mask, hiding our true self, whatever words you want to put around that, is the fact is we create relationships based on the way that that we think that they want us to appear, and how we think that that's what they need, or that's what, and it gets tiring, and those
Yeah.
relationships are not going to be sustainable because you're constantly acting, right? You've got this mask. You can't, well, I can't let them see the pain. I can't let them see the challenges. I can't let them see me grow through something, which again, going back to the power of these stories is we just forget for some reason, thousands and thousands and thousands of years of stories show the devastating lows of people, and yet we try to hide that from everyone.
Yeah. I I like that you bring that up, and I like that you bring up the different stories throughout history. And you and I had this conversation before we hit record. If you look at any of the stories or any of the quote unquote major characters or characters that we talk about nowadays. I mean, I know you and I talked about Hercules and plenty of others. There are always those arcs within their stories, right? Like how they've been trying to go towards some form of achievement success, and then they hit this point where something changes. Something changes within that journey that makes them pivot. It gives them a almost like a nugget within that journey that makes them think, huh, maybe I didn't want that thing, or maybe I want something else. And then you just go deeper and deeper within that. So the stories, pretty much every single one that I've read to this point, it always has a form of adversity. That's a common theme. There's always some conflict, and to some degree, there's always a form of resolution. Now, whether it's the ultimate resolution or just constant resolutions that you find along the path, that's probably varies from one to another. But that's the thing that I love about those stories is that it seems that you are never stuck within any given chapter for too long. So, how is that applicable to my own life? Well, when I'm experiencing a hardship, I think that's a great reminder that I try to at least remind myself of is even this is temporary. Nothing is truly ever permanent. So, whatever I'm going through right now, that's temporary. Now, the challenging part that I find, and I don't know if this is true for you too, or anyone that's going to be listening to this, is trying to rationalize the temporary into a timeline,
Mm.
right? So is it temporary for 24 hours? Is it temporary for a year? Is it temporary for 10 years? That's the mystery of life is that you have no way of knowing how long each one of the events is going to last. But what you do know about any given one of the events is that there is a beginning and there's an end. And then you go on to the next chapter, to the next event, to the next event, to the next event. And so that's at the very beginning when you had asked me the question of who is Oleg. I believe there are two things. It's about people and it's about experiences or events because that's really all there ever is, right?
Mhm.
You're moving on from one experience to another. And then another thing that I'll quickly mention to you is I love how you brought up this concept of having to create a perception of me in order for you to like or in order for you to approve of me. Podcasts are a perfect example. And I really hope once again, for anyone that's going to be listening to this, that people get an opportunity to be on camera like this with someone else in their lifetime, whether it's recorded, published, whatever. It's just a really fascinating experience because I show up as who I am. And sometimes people will say, man, like, where's your suit and tie? Where's the nice background? Where's all these things? I'm like, hey, that's not really me. Like, this is me. And you're going to get this version of whether you're Tim or whether you're Oprah. It's like that to me is where I choose to draw the line of, okay, if I'm going to show up to you in a different attire, I'm not going to be myself fully. And I know that in podcasting space, especially, sometimes you'll hear these things, well, you got to wear this, you got to have the perfect lighting, blah, blah, blah. No, I think you've got to have the things that make you you and help you tap into that more because that's where you get conversations like
I love
this.
that.
That's where you get complete honesty and transparency about who you are. And that ultimately, I think, what leads to transformation because you're going to say and share things that otherwise you won't.
Yep. And that, frankly, that's a core value for me. It's
Yeah.
on my website and everything. It's a core value. It's authenticity. That's
Yeah.
one of the main reasons. And it's interesting you bring this up. And I don't mean to shade any negative light on people that use backgrounds I don't mean any of that.
If
I
that
just
makes
will
them done,
never,
that's great.
I will never do it because I
Mm-hmm.
feel like the chaos that's in my life and my daughter drew the picture. You can see that in the
Yeah.
back. I mean, I have chaos in my life and I love it,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not for everybody. But this is
Mm-hmm.
just who I am. So I will never hide the chaos that's going on. And I greatly appreciate when other people don't because I see it, and it's definitely a value to me. All right. I've been debating, but
Yeah.
I want to crack into this topic
Please.
because I think it's something it came up. We're talking about stories and the story of Odysseus, where he has to mentally make a choice between responsibility and desire. And the reason why I'm saying this and bringing this up, because I think this will be a great topic because there's two good things. Responsibility was given to a king that he had to go off and fight a war. His desire is to stay at home, be with his family, raise his family, and yet he chooses his responsibility to go off and fight the war. Now, obviously, we can debate the minutia of all of this, but there's definitely something that's very powerful when we look at this, because oftentimes in our lives, we're given a choice in our story that we have to make that's a hard choice between a responsible thing to do versus the thing that we desire to do. So if we crack into this and this topic, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but at the same time, I know this is something that people struggle with because they're often given a choice between having to take a job for stability to provide for the family versus what they really want to do. How do we navigate the ups and downs? How do we navigate our stories when we're given a choice between two things that we want to do this, but we have to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll say that out of respect to everyone else's journey, because I'm obviously only living one and I haven't had the opportunity to experience anyone else's. I don't know how different the journey is when you have kids, when you have daughter like you. I don't know how different the journey is when you have a wife. I don't know how different the journey is when you're responsible for a mortgage. Although those things influence your story and your decisions differently, what I will say from my perspective and what I've learned to this point is I think there is a sweet spot for both. I think that there is a sweet spot for taking the time to understand what your desire is or what you want your desire to be. Something else that I've kind of realized or I'm learning about life to this point. There was a time when I used to believe that you were born with a purpose. I don't know if that's ultimately true anymore. I think that you get to choose a purpose
Mm.
and then you get to follow it through your discipline, your actions, whatever else that influences that. I think purpose is a choice. I don't think purpose is something you were born with. Purpose, I think, is somewhat connected to desire, right? You have a strong desire for cultivating quality relationships. You have a strong desire for getting a high paying job. You have a strong desire for caring for your dog. All of those things are choices rooted in some sort of deep thing within me that are fulfilling a hole that otherwise is unfulfilled, right? Like, why am I craving this companionship with a dog? He doesn't speak English. He doesn't do many of the things that my friends are able to do. And yet I still feel a strong connection, strong thing towards caring for that being. Same thing when it comes to jobs. So, what I've come to understand is kind of to answer your question, the first thing I think it's got to come from awareness. It's got to come from awareness and understanding that, okay, there are these two different things. If A is important, how can I bring in B so that A does not go out of alignment? How can I intertwine these journeys? The beauty of being surrounded by so many different people in this lifetime is that other people are doing this. So, therefore, to some degree, I can use you as a reference. I can use you as a starting point. Hey, Tim, how'd you do this? Hey, Tim, I know you wanted to do this X number of years ago. How did you pair that up with a job that is also able to maintain a roof over your head, meal on your table, feed your kids, do
Right,
all
right.
these things? So people are able to do it. So to some degree, I've come into understand that many of these things that I've been trying to solve, they're not necessarily rocket science. And to some degree, I've made them more difficult than they maybe even needed to. That's the honest truth. Thinking that I had to solve this all on my own through this once in a lifetime solution, when really the best thing that maybe I could have done was picked up the phone and say, "Hey, Tim, I've been wanting to do this. And at the same time, I also need to pay my bills. Have you ever had a situation like that within your life? And if so, how did you do it?" Use you an example, use you as a thought partner,
As a story.
as a story, right? Look at your arc and try and understand, okay, he went through these things. Those things might be different for me, but he did it. He made it possible. And that's where I think the element of hope also comes into play. I know at the beginning you kind of mentioned to me the vision and the mission behind this podcast for you, right? To inspire people, to let them know that they're not alone, to let them know that we are so much more similar and connected than we think we are. And that's the beauty of seeing each other along all of these different paths is I can look at you and I can give myself hope, literally, by asking you these questions and by listening to your responses. And then from there, the possibilities are endless. When you're hopeful, when you're optimistic, when you're actually excited, then all these things become toys, tools for you to play with. Then the sandbox becomes unlimited. Then you're not bound to this area of sand. Then it's literally sand everywhere. What can I do? What can't I become? So that's the thing that I've come to realize is awareness, I think, is one. Using other people as references is two. And then after that, it's just doing the work. I think it's just making a series of choices, right? Like,
Yeah, there's always work.
well, it's simple, but at the same time, I mean, that's a podcast of its own. There's discipline, there's what type of work are you doing? So there's all these different things, but it really is about that. And uh, I like what I think it was Chris Paul. I don't. Do you follow basketball?
Not really.
Okay. There's this point guard that used to play for the LA Clippers, and he was interviewed by Rich Roll one of the times, and I remember watching his interview, and he said something that really hit me differently. He said that so much of his days is about just stacking days, and that's I think what it has become for me is stacking all of these actions day after day after day after day, not being tied to them that, oh man, Tuesday's actions didn't produce X, Y, and Z, but just more so creating a good enough process that I can feel fulfilled through all the way throughout and knowing that, okay, at a certain point, these things are bound to hit. Like you're bound to see a reaction, right? That's what happens is you put all this action forward, you're bound to get some sort of response back. That could be a Saturday, that could be in a year, whenever. But at a certain point, it happens. I mean, that's literally how physics works, right? You push something enough, you're bound to get some sort of force back. And that's, I think, what it ultimately boils down to at a certain point is you take enough
Well,
action, you're going to get a reaction.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and one of the things that I actually you brought it up as far as the belief of a purpose, right? And I want to go back to that just for a second because I think this is a really important aspect of our lives
Uh-huh.
when we define that you were born with a purpose, right?
Yeah.
The opposite part of that, which I believe to be a false narrative, is that you could miss your purpose. So,
Okay.
for example, when you say, okay, you're born with a purpose, you're born for a purpose, I do actually believe you are.
Okay.
However, most individuals are placed in a mindset that it's possible to miss it. And I don't believe that at all. I don't believe that you can all of a sudden figures I had it on there. But I don't believe that you could actually there's not just one path for that purpose is what I'm trying to say. There's multiple, and that's where you're talking about is being able to discover and find
Uh-huh.
that passion combined with the purpose to discover how you're going to fulfill in that life. So you may be passionate about entrepreneurship. Well, that passion can translate into multiple different purposes inside of entrepreneur. It doesn't mean you missed it. It just means that there's a different path or a different way to accomplish a purpose. And I think too often we feel like there's only one way, one path, one person, one
Uh-huh.
love of you, whatever. And that's not necessarily, I don't believe that to be, I don't believe you're going to miss it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I believe there's many ways to discover and cultivate and find that purpose in your life.
Yeah. I also believe that you are never too late to start any of those
I
processes.
agree.
I think that you are at whatever time you are meant to be, period. You're never too late, you're never too early. And it's so much of life, at least what I'm finding, is all about timing. It's all about these chapters. I wholeheartedly agree with you that I think life is truly about these chapters.
Hmm.
I had a tendency to put relationships into those buckets, thinking, oh man, Is this the one? Well, it's the one for this chapter. Yeah. Is it the one for the whole book? I don't know. That's a really wild thing to try to answer, right? Is it the one for all the chapters? Then that goes into the expectation of me wanting to think that there's a person that's going to fit every single mold in every single chapter, every single adversity of my life. And yet I don't even know what those things are yet. So that's where I come to believe is that just really trying to focus on chapters of my life instead of the entirety of life and the entire book all at once, because that can become very overwhelming. I've seen it play out within my own life. But
Mhm.
once I started to focus on chapters, to some degree, it became easier to answer a lot of these questions. Is this partner right for me right now? Is this job right for me right now? Are these friends right for me right now? All of those things become easier to answer because now I can really tune into where I'm at right now within my own journey and look at all of these different areas within my journey and say, yes, I'm surrounded by quality of people. No, maybe not. Maybe I need to change some friend groups. Maybe some of the friend groups are influencing me in a way that I don't particularly enjoy myself. And one other thing that I'll mention to you that you kind of brought up through your sharing that it made me think of is when it comes to conflict. I used to really struggle with this concept as far as I would take my conflict on other people. And then I started to realize that so much of the conflict is really just me dealing with my internal self, right? So it's not really you being whatever it is that I think you are, but it's a version of myself that I'm experiencing internally that I'm having that conflict with. And that helped me a lot, especially when it came to people and choosing my friend groups and choosing my work, this, that, and the other, is instead of looking down at people and calling them every name in the book, I just started to realize, okay, maybe I just don't enjoy myself as much when I'm around energy like that, because that's
Yeah.
what it brings up, right? And to some degree, it's freeing. It gives me accountability, it gives me ownership. And that's the one thing I can own at the end of the day is the person that I'm looking in the mirror and saying, hey, this is who I am. I'm made up of all these different versions. When I interact with these people, these versions come out. Which of these versions do I want to be surrounded with every day? Which of those do I want to come out and kind of play and see and touch and feel and do all these different things with?
It's funny you bring that up because I wrote down one of the questions when you were talking about the defining richness and whatever. One of the interesting aspects as we develop ourselves is the growth of empathy that we have for others and understanding their perspectives and understanding where they're coming from and understanding that that person may be lashing out, but it's due to the fact that they went through a trauma and they're being triggered and it increases our empathy in massive ways where we can actually come back and then come alongside and say, well, here's the story. Here's how we can help you through this. Here's what, and it you brought that up and I was like, man, that was almost exactly the answer to that question that I was going to ask. It's
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah. And look, it happens more often than we probably even think so. Part of my job is sending out emails. In fact, after this call, I have another call came from an email, right? Sent her an email, pitch myself as a presenter for their chapter, and then we're having this conversation. So now I've also had email responses where the person has told me to F off, don't ever contact them again. They'll report me. All these different things. What I've chosen to do is I looked at all those instances and I chose to learn. And the first thing that I try to remind myself every single time before I respond is that person is probably going through something. And I just happen to be the outlet that they're going through whatever they're going through with.
Yep.
So
So true.
them telling me to F off, I mean, was the email really that bad that it, you know what I mean?
And then
Like, was it
it
really
makes me
that
feel sorry
bad
for him. Yeah.
that
Like
it made
what's
you
going
say
on,
that?
man? There's something wrong. Yeah.
So, and that's what I try to look at. Sometimes I'll do get an opportunity to actually converse with the person and they'll respond in one way. And then I just ask them, like, what's really going on?
And
And
there's
I
always
just
that
listen.
opportunity. Always
I
that
just listen.
opportunity
And
is
then people open up. Oh man, I just lost my dog. I just lost my partner. I lost my job. There's always some sort of hardship underneath it all. And that's where I look at that as a huge opportunity, because otherwise I would be sitting here, I would be personalizing all of that as an attack against me and my identity and my work and what I'm putting out there in the world, when the reality of the matter is probably nothing to do with that.
Yep.
I just caught
Yep.
them in a moment when they might have been super engaged with that thing, and then boom, they responded that way because their mind was elsewhere.
Yep. That is so true. That is so true. So, all right, actually we could probably keep talking for a while. I love these depths of these conversations because it makes you think about things in ways and different perspectives. And again, that's what we're here for, is to be able to create those stories. But we do need to wind it down. We need to give the opportunity, because we have to kind of close things out. I always want to give whoever is a guest this question, this opportunity to be able to share. Out of all of the things that we've talked about, what is the one thing that you want somebody to walk away with? Whether it's something we said or something that's on your heart, what is that one thing that you hope that somebody will take away and apply or implement?
That you are the author of your story, that no one else is writing the narrative for you, that whatever choices you're making are the choices you're making for yourself, by yourself. And I think the other thing is to check in. That's something that I try to do, to check in with those stories. Whatever I'm creating, I think for me, the ultimate question becomes is it serving me or is it not? And if it's not, what can I do differently tomorrow? What can I do differently today? Not even tomorrow. That's an arbitrary concept that I also had to kind of reframe and understand. What's something that never comes tomorrow, right? You don't actually get to experience it. You get to experience right now. So that's, to some degree, is also empowering, because it gives me a chance to do something different, to create a different narrative. And like I told you at the very beginning, the whole concept of entrepreneurship, I didn't think that was a possibility. Couldn't even imagine what that was like. And yet here I am doing it. So that's the beauty of just being able to live life amongst other people and experience all these different things that we do, is that at some point it creates these opportunities where old beliefs no longer have to be today's beliefs or the new beliefs, that there's a way all those things can change.
Right. Right. Awesome. Awesome stuff. Okay. So, and I know that you speak, I know you do a bunch of different things, but if something you said resonates with somebody, how can they get in contact with you? What's the best way to connect?
Probably LinkedIn. That's the best platform. That's the most active platform that I'm on. And they can just look up my first and last name and find me on there. Beyond that, through a website, uh, I manage a business called Moments Worth Remembering. So we create a lot of custom made appreciation memory books. And the reason why is because I believe so much of life boils down to relationships. And that's something I think many of us don't do, and celebrate each other in our lives and the impact that we have. So those are probably the two of the best ways that people can connect with me, and then obviously through you and Ashley and anyone else that knows me.
Yeah, and we'll put the link down in the notes. So if they're driving or looking, painting, I know
Yeah,
one of the listeners is a painter, and so he's painting while he's listening. So he can check back, and we can actually get those connections for you.
nice.
Again, thank you, man. I so appreciate these types of conversations, and the depth that we're willing to go to just kind of explore topics that I know people struggle with. I know they think about, but they don't always talk about. All right.
Thank
So
you.
those that are listening, thanks again for listening. If you want to take a look, we obviously have YouTube. You can see all of the nonverbal communication, all of the laughs that we have. You get to see all of that. But until next time, keep writing and crafting your story, because every story is important. Every individual has their own story, and it's needed in this world.